Well, I guess this is take three. This is the third one I tried to record. The first one got chewed up by my freaking phone because it doesn't alert me to a full storage memory before it's basically too late, and then it just cuts in the middle of what I'm doing. Thank you, technology. Get banned. The second one got ruined. Well, I guess I was just a bit sensitive on the matter, but you may hear some spectacle in the background. Domino is trying to play with everybody. He's a big kitten, so he's playful. Not everybody's that into it. Some are. If it gets really wild, he's probably playing with Gecko, who is also a big kitten. And they basically tried to rip my house apart. But just a moment ago, he was chasing Carrot. Carrot did not like it, and it got a bit wild. And I felt better just starting over. So this is the third recording, and also I am sick as a dog. I have a blinding headache. I have nausea. The weather here is getting unpredictable. Well, it's predictable in that it is unpredictable. And I had to go out shopping, and I got ambushed by the weather. And I was already not feeling that well, so I should probably not have been shopping, but I needed some stuff, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. So that's my sob story. But to the point. Today I'm not going to talk about what I usually consider genres. Some people consider these genres, but I consider them media, or media types to be more precise. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've kind of hinted at this before, but I'm not trying to create a cinematic universe. I'm trying to create a media universe. Because cinematic universe, as the name suggests, is about having movies and having things around those movies, perhaps. That's not where I'm going, because movies are one of the most taxing things to produce. I'm working on some stuff. I'll get into that at some point. But yeah, um, I'm aiming broadly because that means that there is always something that I'm likely to have the resources to deal with, and most things are a lot easier to deal with than movies. And also because I like the idea of aiming more broadly. But that's a whole psychological thing to try to get into, and I'm not in the headspace for that. So I want to go into a couple of media types that I've set my sights on, in part because each media type has its own advantages and disadvantages, like genres also do. And this can be of some importance when you're trying to do story stuff because you have to handle it differently. And I'll stop trying to do the pitch before showing the product. Now, so let's get into some of the media types I've been thinking of. The first and for some time primary one is literature. By that I mean the written word, books, novels mainly, and short story anthologies. Because I don't want to fall into the trap of just scattered 3-page stories. That has its place. I really, 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 really enjoy the SCP project or the SCP Foundation, especially the early stuff. It's gotten a bit esoteric for me lately, but the early stuff especially I enjoy. But I feel like something more concrete and central is more right up my alley. So what I'm working on there right now is what, for lack of better words, I've decided to call a mega novel. In many ways, it's a series of books, but it's all one big story. I tried to design it as a series, but it took too much out of the story I wanted to tell. So it's now one huge story, and I'm designing it as that. I'll get into the details about that in another video. I've already gotten into some of the details, but yeah, I'm writing it as one big book um, instead of just writing one and then the next. It's all being planned out and stuff like that. I'm trying to put it back together after the big reset um, because I thought that would be a chance to streamline the story. And it was, and it looks better. And I'm chewing my way through pretty fast. But as a media type, the written word has a lot of advantages actually. One advantage, of course, is that anyone can just start doing it. If you want to try doing other media types, you're going to have a lot of challenges. But just writing something, you can sit down with a pen and paper, or if you want to do it a more modern and proper way, you can sit down with a word processor. I started my childhood career as a school play writer with a typewriter, but then again, I'm old as fart. Uh, um, yeah, I don't feel good. Oy, my head is spinning. But aside from that, there are a lot of advantages to writing that are lacking or are more difficult to use in other media types. The one that I really enjoy is the ability to include anything. You don't have to only include visual or auditory things. It doesn't have to be something you can see. It doesn't have to be something you can hear. It doesn't have to be something tangible. You can include thoughts, feelings, abstract concepts, um, vague sensations. You can include all kinds of details that would be hard to focus on in especially something like a movie, unless you use the age old narration device, which is kind of cheating and is usually not very beloved. Not outside children's stories, anyway. You're not going to jump Domino right now. He is peaceful for once. Do not jump him. It's one of the cats. Well, we'll see what happens if he does. Um, but yeah, you can include all kinds of stuff that adds a dimension to it that is hard to achieve in other media types. Um, you can try, but usually you'll have a harder time doing it in a pleasing way than you do in the written word. So you can add some depth that is hard to get elsewhere, which is sometimes why people say that even though a movie based on a book is adapted really well, the book is still better because you can get the inner abstract thoughts of characters. You can you can focus on things that you do not have the control of with movies, at least not as much and not as elegantly or discreetly. You can focus on a small detail. Someone walks into a room, you can focus on a tiny detail that they notice, which would disappear in a larger picture. A picture tells 1,000 words, which means that a few words here and there are likely to be overlooked, get drowned out by the rest. So there are advantages to writing, especially if you know how to use words, which is also something I hope to get into at a later point. But there are, of course, also disadvantages. And the main disadvantages can be summed up in something I heard on a short video, a short form sketch video, which I like the concept that reading is basically looking at a dead tree and hallucinating. So when you ask people to read a story, you're asking them to put in a lot more effort than otherwise, because they need to use their imagination and they need to concentrate on the reading. It doesn't get spoon fed. It's not as easily digestible as other things are. You do also get the advantage from that when an audience does pay attention, they get a lot more out of it, a lot more detail, a lot more depth. You have their attention more than with a movie or radio player would like, because they're not distracted by other things, at least not other things that come from you. So they're focused, so they're more likely to notice the things you want them to notice. But yeah, it does make a lot of requests, a lot of demands from the audience for their efforts and attention. In the other corner of the ring, we have movies or video format, which is definitely more digestible. But even though there's the whole picture says a thousand words thing, that goes again, that things tend to drown out in those thousand words. So you usually end up drowning out anything deeper or more abstract with visuals and sound. And not just because that's what you have to work with, but because it's expected of you. People who do not feel that the visual or sound aspects are engaging will not pay attention at all. So it's kind of a catch 22, that in order to get people to pay attention, you need to distract them. You need to grab that attention with something that will end up distracting them from some things that you could otherwise have told. And it makes a lot of stuff forgettable if you're not careful. And also, it's really hard to produce. Movies, like really big movie productions, are highly dependent on a lot of people working together. And anyone who tried to make people work together knows that it's hell on earth. It's not something that's very easy to do. And it would be nice to just say that when it works, you won't notice that, but you will. You may not know that you notice it, but you do, because everyone will be setting their own fingerprints on the project, whether they want to or not, and a lot of people want to. So it's very hard to have a product that's fully a coherent vision. A lot of what you get is a main product that is the vision of a director, theoretically at least, but with a lot of stuff attached that comes from how people play characters, how people create sets and costumes, how sound fits in, and the one thing that few people ever think about, how the thing is edited. And it's very hard to make all that fit into a single vision. So you usually get something mangled, and you just hope that it's mangled in a way that ends up right. Um, Not gonna go into movies deeper. I've got some stuff working on there, uh, animation style, but not like cartoonish, more like CGI heavy movies. Um, I'll get into that when I get into that. Doesn't belong here, but I've got something in the works. Next, I want to take something that is often overlooked or is used differently than than at least it could in my mind be, and something that is it kind of sits between movies and writing. God, I feel nauseous. And that's radio plays. I could go into audiobooks, but audiobooks are fairly straightforward. That's a book that someone read um, into a sound file or on tape if you want the old-fashioned way. Audiobooks do add something in that a good reader can add a lot of emphasis and a lot of the emotional parts of the text that people will normally have to imagine because you can convey a lot with a voice if you know what you're doing. It takes a talented voice actor or narrator to really do it. But when it's done right, you can convey a lot with it. But radio plays, which are called radio plays because that's what they were like stage plays on radio. I will not get into theatrical stage plays. I cannot touch that. I have no idea how to deal with that. I have some experience with it, but I cannot include that in any way. Um, and I have no idea how to do. I have no idea how to include stage plays in what I'm doing. But radio plays are basically, as I understand it, they started out as being actual stage plays with narration on them, recorded and then broadcast on radios. But it quickly became obvious that you could do a radio play as simply a creative sound movie, basically. Only the audio, so you have narration, um, often very audiobook alike, but you have things playing out in some kind of theatrical form, some kind of I'm trying not to use the word cinematic, but yeah, in a cinematic kind of way with dramatic narration, yes, but also what I'm trying to say, dramatic voice actors playing out characters, sound effects, possibly music, and the like, and it can be extremely entertaining, actually, if done well. But it does have the same problem as movies, although in a lesser way, that it takes a lot of effort to make. And it perhaps has even more the problem that the distractions can drown out discrete details. It's very hard to include discrete details when you only have the audio to go by, when you have to do it in sound. The narration can do some of it, but it can be tricky to really make it work. And even when you do make it work, sometimes other sound will literally drown it out. It also takes, just production wise, a lot of effort, but not as much as movies. A single person with the right talent and the right equipment can make a full radio play, although for dramatic voices, It's usually better to have actual voice actors to do different voices unless you're incredibly talented, and some people are. Uh, but yeah, radio plays kind of fall between the written word and movies, and they got a lot of advantages and disadvantages from either. Moving on, we have comic books, which in some way also fall between movies and the written word, in that it's literally the written word um, put on top of imagery. You can get a lot of the advantages of both the written word and movies in a comic book because narration is more tolerated than it is in movies and arguably radio plays. Narration is almost expected sometimes, but you can still illustrate it and you can get the visual. You can both get visual information across and you can get a lot of emotion across uh, visually. And you also have the advantage that you do not have in movies, that the visuals are not going to just march on without the audience approval. So you can linger, or you can even expect audience to linger, or go back even. If you include some vital clue in a comics panel and you reference that 3 pages later, the reader can actually flip back and check. That is very difficult to do with a movie. Um, Either you have to expect people to be watching the movies at home and be able to go back and check, or you have to actually make flashbacks, and that can be a clunky matter, and it can be especially annoying for audience who already get the clue or don't care about being told the specifics. So you give more agency to the audience when you have a comic book or graphic novel. I know that comic books and graphic novels are not the same thing technically, but I'm kind of lumping them together. If I say comic book or graphic novel, I usually mean the same because I am an uncultured swine. But yeah, you get the advantages from both, but you also get some of the disadvantages from both, in that you require the attention of the audience much more than you do from a movie or a radio play. And it also requires a lot of effort. Um, a lot of comics are the combined efforts of a writer and an artist, because those who write often do not do art, and those who do art often do not write, at least not in a way that befits the requirements of a comic book. Those requirements being a full in-depth story. People who do either can usually do the other, but both can be strenuous, um, and people tend to specialize. It's as simple as that. People who both write and do art and are do both at a level that is sufficient to create good quality, and who have the stamina to put in the effort to combine these into a comic book are rare. Even simple comics are usually a combination of a writer and an artist, because humans specialize. But yeah, radio plays and comic books kind of are the opposites of each other, while both falling somewhere between the written word and movies. which then gets us to one of the most unique media types out there, which is video games. Why is it unique? Because the story depends on the choices made by the audience. I'm trying to mostly focus on story heavy games at this point, but if you're good at it, you can create games that have story without the story being the game. You can have a game that is based around a lot of strategy and a lot of tactical and, and management ideas and stuff like that, but still have a story. But story heavy games are usually more what I call fake linear, which means that they are essentially linear games, meaning you have to make at least some choices that push the plot along, and you have to make them the right way. But you're given a lot of other options to either get the same results or to just enjoy the game. Open world story based games are usually heavy on the latter. You have a story that you're expected to complete, or that you have the option to complete at least, but you have a world that you can play around with. The story, however, only progresses if you follow the breadcrumbs that are laid out for you to further the plot. Video games are hard to make. That cannot be overstated. Whether a video game or a movie is harder to make is something I'm not even going to go into that. But both are really hard to make, and for a lot of different reasons. I probably don't have to say that video games are much more heavy on programming and math and all that than movies are. Movies are, in the end, a more artistic endeavor than it is an engineering endeavor, and video games are very much an engineering endeavor. You are creating a machine. Software, yes, not the hardware, but you're creating a software machine that is meant to tell a story. Whereas the movie, you're creating the story directly. And video games also reach so many other work specialties. You have most of the work specialties that you do in movies. You have you likely have some kind of acting if you're at least if you're serious about story. You have people voice acting at least, and you may also have motion capture or some other kind of method to have actual actors put their craft onto the computer screen. You have the writing, you have the costuming, you have special effects. And I know that sounds weird because technically it's all special effects when it's in a computer, but there is the character and environment animation, and then there are special effects. It's hard to explain without getting into a long diatribe on it. But yeah, special effects are still special effects in games. They're just more expected, and everything has more special effects in it. I'm ranting. But yeah, you need to design almost as many things as you do in movies, and then you need to also have a functioning game engine that can run all the math. And you need the math. You need to know what it means if this kind of character strikes this kind of monster with this kind of weapon. And that's math. That's numbers. How strong is it? numbers. You may not see them on screen. You do in some games. They go, oh, this is a +3 sword or something like that. Others don't. But there are numbers in there. Trust me, there are lots and lots of numbers. And depending on the game, you may also need to design how an entire world works, not just in the basic ways of who runs the place and who does what, but in the actual laws of nature. How does the environment work? How does essentially biology work? Meaning, how do you describe a biological creature or a robotic creature? How do people understand things? How do people learn things? How do skills progress? There is so much, so much. But if you succeed, and it should be pointed out, shut up! I'm trying to work here. It should be pointed out that you can turn down a lot of these things and still have a successful product, a successful end result, because some people do not care about. Um, Stop! Some people do not care about snazzy graphics and everything looking pretty, as long as the gameplay and the story, the gameplay or the story even, gameplay and or the story are engaging enough. You can have dots running around the screen. You can go Pac-Man with your graphics, basically no story, no graphics, but the gameplay is engaging enough that you can keep people going. That's probably not that fitting for a cross media project like what I'm doing, but you can do it. When you do it right, you do get a lot of advantages out of it. You get the full immersion even deeper than a movie. A movie can engage people, but a game can immerse a lot more because the medium reacts to the audience. You can have all the visuals, the advantages of all the visuals, of all the sound things. You can have all that from movies. And you can have a lot of the advantages from writing because if you shape the gameplay right, all the subtleties can be displayed not necessarily in words, but in in-game elements. You can have something showing pain or fear or confusion that you would hint at with the written word. Here it's hinted at with game elements. You can even have outright written elements as done by games like Dark Souls, where you have descriptions of items you get, and those descriptions discreetly tell stories that you can completely overlook if you don't know what you're looking for. You can have a lot of the written word actually included in a video game, even though it's not included as just written word. It does take a different approach and it does take a lot of skill and creativity. But if you do it right, you can have these things. One of the major disadvantages of video games is that you can almost expect a lot of your work to be wasted. Not on everybody, but on a lot of the audience. If you have 15 places that the player can go in a game, they may go to only 7. Everybody picks a different 7. Some pick 9 or 10 or even 11, but most people will not 100% it. And that feels crummy, especially if a lot of people, perhaps even everybody, ignore something you've put a lot of effort into. But those are the breaks, and that's what it takes. So those are the main um, story vehicles that I've been thinking of. There are some minor ones that are a bit more complex, but these are the main ones that I'm thinking of ways to get into. The written word, movies, and video games, I already have projects running with. Radio plays, I'm not going to get into until I have more story work. Comics, um, I may get into earlier when I have the basics of a story structure ready. But right now, I'm trying to focus and I'm trying to get some results and I'm trying to get something out fast without sacrificing the quality of the story. And that's where I'm at. And those are some media types that one can focus on when creating a cross media project like this media universe I want to make around the Embassy of Time. And now I have a splitting headache, and this is over half an hour long, so I think I'll cut it here. But at some point, I hope to go into actual details on various of these media types, but that's for another time. For now, this is taking long enough.